Back and excited to share with you because this is really fresh. As maybe already you've heard, I recently defended my dissertation and am now officially Dr. Mac. Thank you. That's not my intention, but basically I've been apologized to about by 600 times a day by every kid in the school going, Mr. Mac, so sorry, Dr. Mac. And that's just the last thing that I really desire. My intention for this session is to kind of convey to you the results of what I found. And I was lucky enough to be given insight into a field of study that I love. And I know that's not always the case for some dissertations where sometimes their chair directs their way and they just go, this is what it is, and I just got to move forward. But I really lucked out with my chair to be in an area that I have a deep passion for. So full disclosure, we started a house system 2 years at School of the Ozarks. And as you can imagine, COVID did its number on hampering everything that we wanted it to do. So we've really only, we've only run a house system for a year and a half. But my excitement about it came from partially what I was originally hired to do here. I don't think I've even shared with anybody here, but I'm the assistant principal, and my day-to-day is actually running the K-8. However, when I was hired as a student life director, part-time, year one, and had nothing else to do. I was newly hired, and we were a new school, so I just said, I'm just going to figure out as much stuff as I can get my hands into, and it worked. That I got hired full-time, to which my wife was overjoyed because the intention was for me to become the new men's dorm director when that place was finished. So the idea that in our first year of marriage, my wife would be moving into a men's college dorm, she was very happy when they offered the full-time. But that the reason I give that is just to say that the student experience was something early on my table. And I think like many of you who know something about house or run a house, sometimes that's because you didn't like the old model of student leadership or some other kind of system that helped promote and empower students along with many other things. So that's a little of my background. That's a little bit about where we are at SofO. What I want to do is do my best to convey some of the results and my findings from this, but also to be a resource in whatever experience that I've had with house systems. One of the things I want to be very aware of is I want to understand my audience. And so I don't want to belabor points or sit on points that ultimately all of you go, I know you don't need to explain that. So maybe like a quick show of hands, how many of you are currently running a house system in your school? Great. How many of you have a general concept of what a house system looks like in a school? Great. Fantastic. Love it. And I don't want I'm not going to try and give you my oral defense through PowerPoint slides. That's not my intention. Like I've said from the conference, I want this to be a dialogue. So if there are things during my presentation or explanations that you go, hey, oh, whoa, slow down there. You moved too fast. You didn't explain it. Please let me do so. And please interrupt. So I will start. The title of my dissertation was Administrator Perceptions on House Systems, Distributed Leadership, and cross-grade level relationships in classical Christian schools. So I chose to focus on administrators and their perceptions regarding house systems within their schools. I will get to kind of this stuff here in a second, distributed leadership and cross-grade level, as far as what the actual study was asking about. but I'm glad I asked. The way that I chose to define house systems was high school students grouped vertically for inter-school competition, social engagement, distributed leadership among students, and mentorship. So, as much as I give that definition, and meeting with as many people as I met with about house systems, not every single house system fit that category. They are so different to the culture of the school, the vision of those putting them in. But as a basis, this is the way I've chosen to define house systems. Now, one of the things I think in a broader conversation, which I think I'm excited about, is the academic work that's going into classical Christian education, the actual studies and research that are actually uncovering the very things that I think we know to be true in our schools, but I think provide legitimacy to what we're doing to others that don't. At the end of the day, data does speak. Scores do speak. And I do think it's something that I love to see in us continue to do, is a community that is inserting itself into the higher academia realms and circles that we can have a voice with the great things that we're doing. So that's a long introduction to say that prior to my dissertation, there has been one dissertation written in this field, and that was by Kendra Thomas in 2016. And her study was a narrative overview of administrators as to why they started house systems, right? So she went in and she began interviewing and discussing, and basically came out with a majority of this definition, that classical Christian administrators were starting house systems to bolster social engagement, provide more opportunities for students to lead, and mentoring opportunities. So I took that work and I chose to just take it the step further, to begin asking administrators whether they perceive, whether their thoughts on, are house systems actually accomplishing some of the perceived goals that you set out to do it. So that's how I got to my study specifically. The purpose of my study is it's a similar point, but the purpose of my study was to understand whether school administrators perceive the house systems to be fulfilling the intended goal of increasing distributed leadership and cross-grade level relationships. Distributed leadership is a term that's actually more often used in circles of school administration. The idea that school administrators have been given too many things to juggle, as much as the desire to empower teachers with more responsibility and buy-in. And so distributed leadership is that it's not centrally focused, but that there is a host of individuals with leadership responsibilities. Cross-grade level relationships is pretty easily understood, but the idea that freshmen would get to know and develop relationships possibly with 11th graders, and that being a desire of the school. So reasons for the study, and I hope that maybe you would be able to decipher from some of the things that would have been in my paper, along with other things that just are on a personal measure for my work. But one of the reasons I really wanted to do this was, first of all, there's just so little data. I mean, one dissertation and very little research or anything to back up some of the great things that I think house systems are. They often come off at times as just like a bumper sticker to the classical thing we're doing here. And there's like this, hey, we do this kind of like really cool thing over here called house systems. So I really wanted to really validate some of the great things I think house systems, or I should say, uncover whether they are fulfilling and being helpful in schools. I already talked about building upon Kendra Thomas's work, as well as just my hope that we continue to press into the world of academia and make a case for classical Christian education. Total side note, but I ran into a gentleman that is here at the conference today because he showed up late and was lost. And I said, hey man, I'm your guy. I know where everything's at. Tell me where you're at. Tell me what you're doing. He told me that he's on the board of a school down in Arkansas. Their first semester in, and he works at the University of Arkansas in educational policy, and is very intrigued by classical Christian education as a vehicle for character formation. And I'm like, let's talk. Let's talk. I want to know more about what you're doing. So those things really excite me. Before we keep going, I do want to take just a brief moment to paint a broad picture of what a house system is. And again, for those that have it, you may say, well, ours looks like this and looks, like I understand there's a wide variety of how schools are doing this. But when we go back to that definition, way too far. Generally, house systems elect, or they figure out based upon how many students they have and what grades of students they want to run a house system in. So let's just say, let's take a 9-12. And just for easy numbers, they'll say, we have 100 students in our grades 9 through 12. What they would do is they would determine a certain amount of houses that they would create. So let's just say for ease, they'll take 4 houses. And they will give a name to this house, a creed, a color, a motto, kind of make it an identity, a team, if you may. And whoever's in charge of it would split up these students, different grades, into these different houses. So you have maybe Wesley House. Wesley Saunders is sitting back there, so I'm going to call it Wesley House. Wesley House that has 25 students in it with a mix of students in grades 9 through 12. And they would do that for the 3 other houses. One of the things that is pretty central to the idea of houses is this school competition. So they would, many houses have a house cup, a house trophy, a house award that is won at the end of the year. And they put on different competitions throughout the year. Some have large competitions where everybody in that house is competing against another house. For instance, this year we had a men's volleyball tournament where the houses competed against one another, and there was a victor. And the young man let everybody know who that victor was the rest of the week. It was just like, that's all they talked about. There are other ways schools have utilized point systems. Some schools have figured out a system to award points to students who exhibit a quality or a character that they're intentional about. So maybe humility, maybe that be an act of service where they will make it public to the student body. Hey, this is Dr. Mack here. I want to give 20 points to Timmy today. He chose to pick up a kindergartner's trash that they left after lunch all on his own. That's the heart, that's the desire we want here. 20 points, rah, rah, rah. So there's a host of creative ways schools have competed together in that. These student leaders are elected in various different ways to their house, whether that be a student vote, faculty vote, administration, an interview, very many different ways they've done that. Those students are then in charge of their house and help put on competitions. Many schools use them as also a party planning committee, an event coordinator for other events in the school. as well as the desire to create community, to create fellowship with a group of students that aren't always together. So there is a host of different ways schools have taken that, but I think that covers maybe the general kind of idea that is centered around house systems. I think when I get to the results, you'll see some of the other things that were uncovered that administrators saw that their houses were doing. So any questions on that? Any additions that those are running house systems of like, this is a really foundational piece of our house, about houses or how they made up or how they're run? Great. Okay. So my research questions for my study was, does the house system method of organization have any impact on student leadership as perceived by school administrators? And then secondly, does the house system method of organization have any impact on cross-grade level relationships as perceived by school administrators? For my research, I was able to interview 10 different administrators from around the country. No correlation. I posted something on the ACCS forum, and within 1 week had 7 people respond, to which I was overjoyed. And through connections through this conference and just being a part of the classical Christian world for 10 years had others that were able to be a part. All of my interviews were done through Google Meet and transcribed using a software. That went really smooth. I was really fortunate to be able to get my participants so easily and so readily. So the results for question 1, does the house system method of organization have any impact on student leadership as perceived by school administrators? I walked away with 2 large themes, those being more positions of leadership and increased student responsibilities. Regarding more positions of leadership, the majority of participants mentioned that they used house systems to replace the more traditional student government or student councils, feeling that it was lacking something, and that the house system basically provided more positions. It's really easy to say, just more positions for students to step into areas of leadership. I think this is a really great quote, but I think participant number 2 said this: I think that the house system is really our main conduit for students to have opportunities to express leadership in the school right now. And so they were pleased with that. They thought that it was being successful in that. The second thing that goes along with that they were, participants seemed really passionate about, was not only that did it provide more opportunities, but that it also increased the types of responsibilities that they were given. So as you can understand, if just along with competitions, the idea that the students were more often than not the ones in charge of running the competitions, pulling off the competitions, being in charge of who's competing. I'll give you an example. There was an amazing participant up in Wisconsin, and he was talking about how they, as much snow as they get, that they have a snow fort building competition. And he was mentioning that one of the great lessons that they always come back to during that time is the lesson to the house ambassador, leader, whatever those positions were called, was, I just want to remind you, it's not your job to always have the answer to the competition. Your job is to delegate and to collaborate with your house. You don't always have to be the visionary, the idea guy. It's your job to get the right people in the right place. And I just think, wow, that's a really great conversation that he just said is just almost a staple for them during that time. Hey, young man, young woman, you need to begin looking to your students for help on how to win this competition. So participants were felt that it did help not only in more positions, but that it also increased the types of things that they were doing. Particularly, one of the other things that they had felt was that their old systems generally felt like party planning committees, and only that. That it is just throw the formal, throw the skate party, and that's basically it. One of, I would say, my favorite findings and things that was just overwhelmingly true to this point of increased student responsibilities. That was like, to me too, like, oh, wow, that's awesome. Like I'm invested in that too, like learning from these people. Many participants' view of this idea of enculturation, that one of those responsibilities was that they saw these house leaders' job as teaching the culture of their school to their younger students. And I was really floored by this concept about how they really sought to do that in the way that they were training their students hey, this job is not just planning events. This job is embodying the school's culture and passing that along down to younger students. And they saw that to be very, very powerful, often mentioning, as I think something we all know, is that we can say something about how we want our students to act and function in this little culture that we have going on at the school. But when a senior or a junior calls somebody out for their dress code, right? I should also mention that many schools utilize points in a negative way as well. That if a student were to come to school in the wrong shirt, that they might lose points for their house. And so what one participant mentioned is saying that the lower school was quite envious of the upper school because the amount of tardies, dress code violations, haircut requirements was significantly lower in the upper school because it was the job of the student leaders to police and make sure that they were following through with what the expectations of the school were. And if not, they might lose points. Other schools even went so far as to tally GPAs for points. Other schools went so far as even discipline referrals. That wasn't the overwhelming majority. In fact, I would make the note that some of the houses that had been doing it longer came to the revelation that was actually not beneficial. It was actually hurting in some ways and capacities. That was their perception. I'm not saying that's what I believe, but that was their perception. So the piece of enculturation that upper school students would embody the school culture and pass it on was a really great piece, I thought, that many participants spoke on. So in regards to just a nice graph to say, of the 10 administrators, 8 of them believe that it was had a positive impact, that house systems had a positive impact in regards to student leadership and spreading that with more responsibility. 2 administrators mentioned that they didn't feel as though it had a negative or a positive, but we're still kind of thinking and seeing how that was working within their school. So research question number 2, does the house system method of organization have any impact on cross-grade level relationships as perceived by school administrators? So are students getting to know students in other grades? The 2 themes I walked away with is participants saw house systems as a mechanism for student relationships and an increased sense of belonging. So mechanism for student relationships, another way of saying it, it's a vehicle that they recognized that allowed them to put students in positions to get to know other students. I think each school does it differently. Some schools have it 1 period a day during the week. So maybe their last period on Wednesday, I know like one school mentioned they did this where it was a house period. in that house period, it was like a rotation of competitions or meetings that the house ambassadors or leaders led, whether it be a devotional or singing songs. They saw it as another way for students to be the ones leading. Other schools utilized lunches at different times to say this is a house lunch. So Wesley House is going to meet outside on the picnic tables, and you're going to get together and fellowship over lunch today. So they saw as a way of grouping students. They had to cut pieces of their schedule to make time for houses, but that they saw it as a positive way to help increase this, which ultimately moves to one of the bigger benefits that they saw, which was an increased sense of belonging. I didn't have any kind of cap or I didn't have any parameters on how big a school or how small a school my participants were coming from. And so I had a wide range, but I would tell you the schools that were a lot smaller were really invested on this point, because more often than not, one of the things they recognized, and often this point was, the house system was birthed out of this point for them, was that they just kept losing students because the student was saying, I just don't have friends. I don't have community. And so many of these small schools utilizing house systems in hopes of remedying that problem, that they would have a sense of a group or a team that just makes them feel like they belong to something. I think this is a feeling that things like athletics do quite well. I'm a part of this team. I'm a part of the basketball team. But as we all know, not every student is an athlete, is not cut out or desires to be an athlete, but that house systems, I think, provide a similar sense to that. So participant 10 says there's a sense of belonging in the community within the houses. Yeah, that's not the greatest quote because it doesn't really say much, but they really they were very invested and passionate about the sense of belonging that house systems allowed them to help foster within their students. Same kind of chart, even more so on cross-grade level relationships. Participants mentioned that they thought that it had a positive impact. And again, those that didn't say it had a negative impact, rather just no impact, or they have not any experiences to say otherwise. So conclusions and takeaways were, for me, that overall participants had a positive view of house systems in regards to those two areas. I will make note I did not decide to ask them about mentoring opportunities. That was just a little too much to bite off, as my chair told me that it would be good for me to focus on distributor leadership and cross-grade level relationships. But I think this study will help lead legitimacy to some of the positive things houses have had. I don't want to paint everything as it's the greatest thing ever. I think many participants also shared how that has changed many times over for them, that it has been an elusive fish at times of figuring out how to do that correctly. And I think a lot of that has to do with the culture of the school and what their desire. I think a lot of that has to do with the size of the school. And this is maybe getting a little bit ahead of myself as far as some ending comments here. But one of the things that I think would be a very interesting study moving forward is the correlation between perceptions and resources allocated. I think the schools that saw houses as very central to their aroma, their culture, had a very large buy-in. both by students as well as administration. I think schools, participants, administrators that saw maybe as just a replacement for student councils, I think struggle with that a little bit more. There's kind of this little saying that I've kind of been known for at SofO, and it's 2 feet in or 2 feet out. It's just kind of this, we get to that time of the year where we're asking people to re-up with us to come back in. And when those families that don't re-up with us, a good thing for me, I remember I used to take it so personal. It's like, I know you, and like something you all feel. I know that. But one of the questions for me has always been, was this family 2 feet in? Was this family bought in with us? Or were they kind of testing the waters and they were kind of middle of the, how bought in were they with us? And that's been a really good litany. I know I'm like taking a little rabbit trail here, but it's a long way for me to say that I think participants' perceptions when their school was 2 feet in with this house system idea had very, very positive returns on that investment. It's a tricky thing because as far as, you can take houses like really far. You could go really far in structuring your day around houses. And the question is how far do we want to go with houses? Who are we going to get to run that? That entity is not just going to run itself. It needs somebody to do that. And I think the financial aspect of events and other things that go along with it is something to consider. And these participants mentioned that. I think on top of that too, I think the other thing that just intrigues me is to say there's kind of like almost this cycle, the life cycle of houses. I think I've even experienced that where I got into it year one and didn't know what I was doing and then saw and talked to other people and go, oh, okay, that's like what level 2 looks like. Okay, like I can get there. Like that's creative ideas. And part of us starting a house system actually came out of sessions that were given at this conference a long time ago where I came upon the idea and was intrigued enough about it. But I think sometimes we just need pictures to understand what that looks like and see it in successful models. So that's my presentation. I'd love to answer any questions. I'd love to answer both as in review of my study or even in light of my experience with house systems or questions. So there's kind of two ways if you have any questions on that. Josh, he said he wasn't going to be here, and now he's here. I don't know how that works.
Sorry, I missed the first part. So maybe you already answered this. Do you have which schools are doing K through 12 and which are school only?
Yeah. So my parameters, I didn't have my parameters for administrators in this were that they were currently running a house system, and that they have been at that school for more than a year. So pretty broad because there's not a lot out there. And it's kind of like this uncovering of, oh, you run a house system? Oh, you run a house system? The majority of participants that were a part of mine, I would say 7 of them were 912. Probably 2 of them were 712. And 1 was K-12, which I had never understood the K-12 thing. But the way they did it, I was like, it was very creative. They actually, so it's a little different when I say they did a K-12, but the way they did it was a student was not actually placed in the house until I think 9th or 7th grade. So in K through 6, the classroom was a house of the 5 houses in the upper school. And so they would come to the competitions and they would be cheering on Wesley House. And so by the time they get to 7th grade, they were just like, whoa, like bought in as they've seen kind of these older students that they've been cheering on these different houses in that. And so I think too, just the pure enjoyment I received of just hearing other schools and how they did that was fulfilling for me in that alone.
Just follow up on that. How many did you say were 9 to 12?
I think it was 7.
Do they correlate to those that have the most positive experiences?
I'd probably have to go back and look at that a little bit more, understandably, just because it wasn't a part of, like what I was actually looking at.
I say that because 7th and 8th graders are some of the bane of house systems.
But I think it goes back to many of the points that were made, right? Like if administrators go, I want to enculturate students that don't get what we're doing. Okay, what's the best way I can do that? Well, what if I tried my hand at empowering my seniors and juniors that exhibit the essence of this, that they may have some of an effect on that? Now, as you mentioned, it's not as if like that kid walks in the room and the 7th grader is like, oh, now I get it. Now I understand what it means to be a patriot at SofO. It's not, I guess I would just, and I think I've said it, but I would just say it again. It's not like any school felt like they had it down. Like, we've got this down and we're setting it and leaving it. I think there's just, whether how much of a degree they're turning, most participants were acknowledging, we love what it's doing, we think it's being beneficial, but we're moving that 10 degrees a little bit every year. I mean, even for me, I look at next year and partly due to this, but just seeing how we could better utilize that within our school. I mean, I'm like 20 degrees next year of moving that, how we can do that. So, yeah, 9 through 12. No, 7 through 12, excuse me. 7 through 12, but we've struggled mightily with that 7-8 involvement. I mean, part of us is just like our school schedule, like being in 7-8 over in that building and 9-12 being over here, and then like student events, like is 7 and 8 joining 9-12 events? They really don't like that. Nobody likes that. So it's definitely something on our plate to kind of figure out. But at the we do some weird things. I would say there has been one positive, and I hope you understand. I'm speaking for me now. We do devotions each morning to start the day off, as I know many of you do. I have given pretty much all devotional responsibilities to the houses. So each week a house runs those devos. And they put together, I get with them, and each month we pick out 5 pieces of scripture, 5 prayers. We use a document of different catechisms that we've kind of put together. And then I have 2 kind of student worship crews. So they run that whole thing. That has been awesome. That's been a great thing to just move off of my plate and onto their plate. But one of the things that we love about our devotion is quite a while ago, we started doing prayer groups. And every Wednesday, the 8th graders are with us for devotions. 7th grade stays over there. Just saying it just doesn't make any sense why we do this. I'm trying to change it. But our 8th graders actually start their Devo day over here and then their first class. So they're a part of the prayer groups. And if I could say just of one thing, just to be a part of those groups and have those relationships where they look up to a senior guy or girl that goes like, this person's praying for me. and hopefully creating an atmosphere where I feel known, and like just great things that have come from that for us. So it's kind of the give and take, and I think it's probably more participants mention figuring out how to wrestle with that 7-12, 9-12 deal.
I like that your comments about not necessarily treating all grades the same, or maybe 9 to 12 grades run a certain way and the other grades run a different way. That's more of a gets integrated in, but not fully integrated.
Yeah, that one participant mentioned just that their school community just kind of was really just baffled by this whole concept of houses. You know, we've been part about the school for 7 years, 8 years, and then all of a sudden, like this whole paradigm about the student experience changes, and so I think they set out to remedy that by making the classrooms a part of a house and cheering for them, and so their school assemblies were just, just like live. They were just, you know, you get a K6 in there cheering. They don't even know why they're cheering, but they're going nuts, and it just amplified everything for them. So, some really creative ideas.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
We're pretty new to this idea, and so, but how often do they typically reassign houses? Is this like a yearly thing where they reassign houses?
Great question. In conversation with those administrators and knowing a lot of different houses, houses generally keep students in that same house for the majority of their time, along with even keeping siblings a part of that. So there is some sense of like, you know, I just think about my own kids, like Hudson becomes part of Wesley House, and Boone ultimately not in a house is already like, you know, here we go, man. Like I'm in this house and I'm a part of this, and it's a family deal. So they generally don't move or change. Some administrators spoke about growth problems with that, or even competition problems with that, where they didn't think through how to divvy out set students between those competitions. And it created a pretty large imbalance that they had to kind of figure out a way to redistribute in a certain way. One administrator, probably running the largest house with the most amount of resources, spoke pretty in depth about an experience with that, where he mentioned it was the point at which he understood the power of a house in the school, because there was a large power imbalance, and he just, without really kind of asking or like giving a heads up, like in the summer, redistributed some students and came back, and he said he had multiple parents reach out and say, hey, we're really upset that we got moved. My child's community and friends that he's developed in those different grades, and we bought in. And so that was a revelation to him. It's like, whoa, you know, I messed with a community, a little community here, and I didn't know that it meant that much to them. And that was a point that he made. So, yeah, good question.
Just in, we're kind of in the implementation stage, or we're really kind of just talking about it.
Yeah.
So my question is, in some dialogue we had, actually I haven't been a part of it, I've just heard that people are dialoguing about it. If we're dividing the students into houses, what did you guys personally do? Did you just sit down with the staff members and divvy up different kids, or was there a test, or?
Yeah. Well, personally for me, what I did was, we have 25 students, give or take, per grade. And I just split it guy-girl. And then I just tried my best to say, to distribute by student giftings and talents and dispositions. It's worked out pretty well for us in that way. And again, I'm not an expert, as we're only in our third year, but it's worked out that way. That's the way we've done it. Anybody else who's run a house, I'd love to hear how you guys have done that too.
Do you keep siblings
I do.
So we used to, but our school is quite small right now. We have roughly 40 students from 7th to 12th grade. And over the past several years, we actually have reset our house system. We have changed the houses and the names and kind of reformulated.
Yeah.
And when I started at the school, we would keep families together because a lot of the competition stuff happened outside of school. They were building a raft and had to meet outside of school at someone's house. So to simplify things for families, so we didn't have one family needing to go in 3 different places, siblings were together. What ended up happening then was that we would have a really strong musical family over here in this house, and ended up with 2 or 3 really strong musical families in the house over here, and then a really athletic house over here. And then, oh, this family leaves the school because they moved out of state. Now we've lost a good portion of that house, or this family leaves the school because they're disenfranchised with it, you know, and so then it, as we have restructured now, we aren't putting siblings together, but it is a split up people within the grade, based on not having the same gifts and talents in each house as much as possible. The house that I am a co-leader with now, we have no juniors or seniors because of the way some things have fallen. This year we had 1 senior, and that has since changed. But what we do with our lower school, which is new, so I can't really say if it works or not, is that they have houses that are related to our upper school houses, and the pairings don't change, but the lower school students get rotated throughout their time. So my son's in pre-K and he's in House Hildegard right now, but next year he'll be in a different house. So he learns to cheer for all the houses and gets excited about what that concept is, but he doesn't feel like he's already part of the house related to Hildegard. He'll eventually get his full placement as a 7th grader.
Yeah. I mean,
Oh, I was just gonna say, we have a 6th grade teacher kind of do a, I don't know, what do you call it? Anyway, I've given her like 5 different things, like musical ability, you know, artistic, and then
Yeah.
she'll rate them, and then we kind of do the same thing, very similar to what you do, male, female, and kind of try to balance out the houses.
yeah. Yeah.
I would say, I also have a, just a question from your research or
Yeah.
study. We've actually had like 3 house resets. And so our older kids are actually the ones that are really struggling to buy in.
Yeah.
Our 7th and 8th grade are the ones that are excited. They love Good Friday. They like it's their day, or they love, you know, whatever. And it really, I don't know if it's just a couple more years we need to wait and then, you know, buy in, or
Yeah.
if you have any thoughts on older kids.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're alone in that. I think as mentioned, schools have tried several different ways to foster that buy-in. Unfortunately, I can't speak from personal experience. I don't know what it is at SofO. That I would say maybe is not a buy-in concern for us. Our students have attached to it in a fun way. I don't know that there's one thing I would say I'd point to for us.
One of the issues, and when I say 7th, 8th graders are veins in the house existence, is for that reason you're saying. It's actually because they are so excited about it. It's not that they're not interested in it. It actually becomes where they become so overwhelmingly excited about it, and then house becomes affiliated with 7th and 8th grade.
Mm.
And a high school student, it becomes oh, that's what you did in 7th and 8th grade, right? So you kind of want to move on to more mature things.
Yeah.
Which is maybe why you guys, if it's more 9th through 12 focused, doesn't have that feel.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's funny, like the way you say that, Josh, because I'm like, I really want 7 and 8 to be a part of it because I want it to remedy some of those things. It's just like a 7th and 8th grader just not like having any place, you know, like just the kind of like proverbial way we talk about 7th and 8th graders, just not having an identity or a group, or just kind of like feeling like they're caught in this middle. So maybe that's the catch. It's like a catch-22 is you try to include them. It may take away from maybe 9-12 in some capacity. But I don't, to that point, I don't really know if you were to ask a 7th grader at SofO, what does house mean to you? That they would say, it's what I live for. You know, like I don't think they would say like, yeah, I'm in a house and we do stuff every once in a while. We actually, you know, on a more practical side, like we utilize houses, and I actually got this from Josh. This is actually why we started with 5 houses. It sounds like really funny saying this though, but like Josh had the idea, I think, where they had 5 houses a long time ago or a while ago, and in some ways utilize those to assign daily tasks. So the house's task, like Monday was their day to do stuff. Well, I mean, for us at Hard Work U, like that actually was like a really helpful way to think about it. So, you know, every lunch period, House Wesley on Mondays is in charge of the cleanup. They're in charge of checking the bathrooms. They're in charge of ... that we give these little tasks to that we follow up with. It's a conversation about delegation. It's a conversation about holding students accountable, because I look some days and I go in there, there's like 6 kids, you know, 15 minutes after lunch. I'm going, you know, what's going on here? Why are you here so long? And why are there only 6? Well, so and so had to go and they didn't talk to me. I'm like, you know, like that's, here we go, man. You wanted this, like hard conversation here with your fellow student, but you asked to be in this position. Let me help walk you through that. So it was a really beneficial thing for us, and that fits within our culture. Again, it's a part of SofO. We leave things better than we found it. We don't have any janitors. We don't have any college students that clean anything for us. Everything that is here is cleaned by us. And so it holds a kind of another layer to who we are as a school that we've utilized.
And one of the you just bring up is one of the interesting issues we ran. So we used to do LA. There's so much great about having that setup. One of the issues, maybe you guys have some kind of physical, visible identifier to a house that the students wear. We've talked about this. We've never have done it.
Uh-huh.
But one of the teachers have talked about, they don't know who's in which house, so all these students leave the lunchroom and they don't, you know, it's like, oh, and then you end up in a situation, there's 4 kids.
Yeah.
Where's all these, like, who's in the house again?
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have faculty really involved in that capacity. If I'm wanting to give a student responsibility, then I want to give a student responsibility. And that's the way I see it. This is your job. And ultimately, you not doing your job and holding your fellow housemates accountable, either by not knowing them or holding them to that standard, is actually hurting the people that are doing the right thing. You know, like those other 5 that are going to miss 10 more minutes of Algebra 2, that's on you. Like, you know, so I want, like, a real desire for us is to give, just personally too, give students like real jobs that they can fail in. Like we had a student event the other week that I'm just like, this, you know, like there were a lot of things being thrown together in the last 30 minutes and decisions being made at the last second. And that's an opportunity that I get to sit down with them. How did you feel an hour before that event? Tell me how you were feeling. The answer was erratic. I don't want to do that again. Okay, well, let me walk you through why I know you feel that way. Because you did not do the work up front, and you didn't delegate, you didn't communicate, you didn't have a vision. This is what leadership is. And I think some of the things that me and Josh talk about, I'm here to create real leaders. And that is not just in, let's have a skaties party, you know, like Sadie Hawkins Skate World party. Like, you know, I wanted to often teeter on you failing. That they know that. You know, devotions. There are sometimes I walk in the auditorium and nobody's up front, and I just sit there. Like, I've clearly communicated whose house it is this week. Everybody should know. And it would be so easy for me to jump up there, but it's just a core concern and value of mine. I want to really provide students the opportunity, and to provide that opportunity must mean they must have the opportunity to also fail. And that's hard because it always comes back to that's my realm. But if it's understood with those that I work for, hey, I just want you to know, this might bomb. This might really bomb. And I hope you know you're okay. Like I want you to be okay with that. And I have that backing enough to allow those things to happen. So again, I'm talking more in our personal world as far as SFO rather than there.
You'll democratically elect student leaders.
We're probably going to redo that. We do, by students, we do allow students to vote for students. I think there is something more to providing more barriers for that amount of leadership.
We went to an application this year that very much like a work application.
Yeah.
And then pastoral reference. And then the faculty voted on them to get to narrow it down, and the students can vote from that pool.
Yeah, there's just like, again, after talking to 10 administrators, my list of things I go like, wow, great idea, I want to implement is just like so long. But I hope that's what the houses just keeps happening, is that we keep having conversations and listening and, hey, what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And I hope that things like this, where you don't have to come to a conference, you can actually read like real research that says like, hey, wow, there's some backing to this other than, we think this is a cool idea and let's give it a run. Like, I think too was, as you know, communicating it to parents. Wow, there's like studies done that show like people think this is a good idea. Like, what a wild concept that we would use academia to make decisions and communicate those to our parents with something backed up in that way. So, want to be cognizant of your time. If there's maybe one more question, otherwise. Yeah.
Is it possible to get your dissertation to have that magazine?
Yeah, so I'm actually in the editing phase as we speak. I told my editor, please allow me to get through this conference. And she keeps pushing me because I defended so early this semester that there's just like that queue of, all the editing and everything. Like, I didn't respond to her email in 2 days, and she's like, are you there? What's going on? I'm like, no, I'm there. I just have a life. Like, I got other things to do. I know you know this. But hopefully by the end of the semester it'll be posted, and would be more than willing to share if that would be helpful. So thank you so much for attending. I love talking house stuff. So if you want to know more or pick my brain about some of the great ideas, I would love to sit down at some point or a phone call. So this is not the end of that.